Well, summer 2017 is officially over, and while we'll never get back the precious time we spent glued to our screens watching all this anime, there is no point dwelling on the fact that we're all going to, eventually, run out of time, so let's talk more about anime. I didn't watch nearly as many titles as I thought I might, especially in comparison to the summer 2016 lineup, but there are still some that I want to talk about before we fully immerse ourselves in the fall season. As I am currently unable to afford more than the premium membership with Crunchyroll that I am lucky to balance month to month, only titles that are available on the service will be appearing in this video. I really wanted to check out Love and Lies as well as Welcome to the Ballroom, but, well, money. That said, there are still quite a few titles that I only watched the premiere episode of before I either drop them like a hot potato or put them on hold, so we'll break this video into two segments, starting with the titles I didn't finish, then moving on to the titles I did manage to complete. Since this is my first ever seasonal roundup, I'd like to take a moment to explain how I'll be scoring and judging the titles I discuss. I won't be awarding any rank to the titles I dropped or put on hold, as I cannot testify to the overall quality of said titles, but I will be awarding the ones I completed with one of 3 potential badges. 1080p for the titles I feel will go down in history for being shining examples of what the medium can produce. 720p for the titles I enjoyed, but still noticed imperfections that need to be addressed, and 360p for the titles I disliked, but still managed to finish, or guilty pleasures that I shouldn't have liked, but still did for some reason. It should also be noted that I'll be awarding my anime of the season to one of the titles I completed, but the ones I didn't finish aren't eligible for this award. Now, let's dig deep into it, as there were a lot of titles I left unfinished this season. In Classroom of the Elites, we're faced with a strikingly similar situation to the one presented in Assassination Classroom, minus the whole octopus teacher with a tendency to move at Mach speed thing. Academy designed for the elite and society? Check. Bloated cast that would need at least 30 or 40 episodes to flesh out? Check. It seemed, at least based on the first episode, that the drama was slightly manufactured and made the cast look rather foolish, which is weird considering they're supposed to be the pinnacles of society. I didn't actually mind the first episode so much. In fact, I remember wanting to watch more so I could get to a concrete opinion on the series, but I never got around to it. I suppose it's more accurate to say I'm putting it on hold for a rainy day, but who knows if that day will ever come. Hajimete no Gal, or My First Girlfriend is a Gal, seems like it'd be the era manga sensei of the summer 2017 season, and if you only watched the first episode like I did, you might agree. I get the feeling, despite my first impressions, that it might be going somewhere and there's actually something of merit beneath the surface layer of fan service, but that might just be my naivete. I should really do something about that. I'm actually quite curious what this series is really about, so maybe I'll give it a second try sometime in the future. I didn't know what to expect when watching the first episode of Katsugeki Token Ranbu, but I was absolutely blown away by the gorgeous visuals and compelling story in the premiere, and for some reason I left it hanging despite that. I was sure it'd be something else entirely, but they really surprised me with the first episode, and I would definitely like to return to it if given the opportunity to do so. It's not all that surprising, as the UFO Table has a rather strong track record. Restaurant to Another World seemed like the kind of series you shouldn't watch if you're hungry, but I didn't necessarily have any outstanding issues with it. I think my biggest complaint was the high fantasy setting. I'm already not a huge fan of that genre with a few exceptions, but with a friend's recommendation, I'm not dropping it outright. Given the strong use of food as a plot device, it reminded me of titles like Sweetness and Lightning, but in the case of Restaurant to Another World, it seemed to be a standalone experience that doesn't carry over week to week. In Another World with my smartphone is... yeah, I dropped that shit. I can't even come up with anything that might be able to salvage this train wreck. I came in with hopes that it might at least be somewhat endearing or funny, and the concept of isekai brought my anime of the year last year, ReZero, so there was a part of me that kind of hoped this would be good. I couldn't get past the fact that the main character is basically Kirito with a white coat, however. It doesn't help that he's also the definition of a Gary Stew, and while you could say that's part of the joke, It just didn't feel like it. It was dumb. It pains me to say that Owari Monogatari Season 2 is on my list of incomplete anime, especially since I seem to be singing the series' praises lately, but alas. It's not because of anything the series has done, really, it's just that I haven't had the time to spend watching. It's hard for me to sit and watch an episode for the total allotted time of 45 minutes or above. This is weird considering I can watch an episode of Game of Thrones, which, if you count the final 2 episodes of this most recent season, come way above that length. I'll just say that after I finish Sakura Quest, I'll be making an effort to finish the tale of Koyomi Ararararagi. Sorry, I stuttered. I don't have much to say about Chronos Ruler besides how immediately deceptive it was with its presentation. I didn't expect there to be a jazz-infused style, especially since it didn't really prepare the audience for that when you take into account the synopsis and title, but there it was. I'd like to give this a second chance, but I'm not really in any hurry to do so. Clean Freak Aoyama-kun seems like a hybrid of the interesting person trope, the likes of which can be seen in Haven't You Heard I'm Sakamoto and Tanaka-kun is Always Listless, and the sports anime trope, but it seemed to be focusing more on the sports rather than the eccentricities of Aoyama, which is weird given the title. I really racked my brain on whether or not I should give this series more than one episode, but in the end, I just couldn't justify it. Fastest Finger First is dumb. It's really dumb. It's like some anime executives were really desperate to come up with a series that hadn't been done before, and they were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't consider whether or not they should. I guess at the very least it's interesting, but only in the worst way. I didn't mind A Centaur's Life so much, but it ended up on the back burner when I settled into the handful of anime I kept up with all season. It seemed to have a light shoujo-ai theme that was prevalent throughout the first episode, and I'm being told that theme continued, which I find to be interesting given the setup for the series. I had a feeling while watching the OP that it would go in a darker direction at some point in the undetermined future, but I can't tell if that's just me or not, so I'll just keep this series on the to-do list for later. 18 If is another title that I initially dropped due to lack of interest and a lack of confidence it was going anywhere, but thanks to a friend of mine who seriously recommended I give it another shot, I will definitely try to do so in the future. I like the fact that each episode has a new director, which I feel would allow the series to do something its contemporaries cannot. I remember thinking that Convenience Store Boyfriends had a weird animation style that I just couldn't get over. It wasn't quite 3D, but it wasn't fully 2D either. That, paired with the lack of convincing voice acting and the slow burn of the first episode, really took me out of the series, preventing any progress from being made. I won't lie, Elegant Yokai Apartment Life almost became the series that broke my inability to enjoy titles revolving around yokai, but in the end, well, obviously I dropped it. I honestly don't remember anything about the series, which tells you all you need to know. I was worried when I first started watching Angel's 3-Piece because when anime and lollies get mixed, it can sometimes be a volatile situation. Not always, mind you, but sometimes. And it seems like that's partly where this series went after I dropped it, and that's all I'll say about that. Alright, those were the titles I either dropped or put on hold for the future. Now, let's see what titles I stuck with until their conclusions, for better or worse. I guarantee you, it isn't as many as I dropped, but there were actually a few diamonds in the rough this season that I will point out. Oh boy, what can I say about Gamers? In the beginning, it was one of the only series that physically made me laugh out loud due to the deconstruction of typical anime tropes, but later on it had me laughing out of sheer incredulity at the characters' inability to control their own situations. I've heard it being referred to as Misunderstandings the Anime, and that's not far from the truth, but there's a misunderstanding among the audience. If you're going into this series with the expectation that you'll see a series about games, don't. It's more of a character analysis than anything else, and speaking of the characters, they're all amazing. Each of them has their own unique characteristics that both complement and contrast against their contemporaries really well, which helps when the series is more about the gamers themselves than the games they're playing. I would like to offer props to the production studio for obtaining the license for some of the games they played during the series, such as Persona 4 Arena. It's not a knockoff, they actually play Persona 4 Arena, and it's one of the most surreal experiences in the medium of countless McDonald's knockoffs. I would love to see a Season 2 of Gamers, and considering the final episode is slightly disappointing since they waited till the end to offer a commentary on whether or not DLC makes any sense rather than, I don't know, settle literally anything among the characters, it might get one. If it doesn't, I mean, I guess I'm okay with it, but I would definitely love to revisit this cast and get that closure. I'm giving Gamers a 720p for keeping me invested in the series despite its subpar and emotionally unsatisfying finale. I would love to receive a second season, but in the current volatile state of the industry, I can't tell if it'll be popular enough to warrant it. I'll just have to wait and see. It was such a relief to hear that New Game was receiving a Season 2, especially since I loved the original. And it's a pleasure to say that this season was just as good, if not better than the last. It's really just more of the same, but in this case, more of the same is exactly what we needed. New Game is a series that thrives on the ordinary, innocuous events surrounding the staff of Eagle Jump, and is really dependent on the characters, which it gave us a lot of. Unlike with the first season, this time we're able to witness the creation of a brand new IP entitled Peko, which features Susakaze Aoba stepping up to the plate as a character designer alongside series favorite Ko Yagami, and a healthy rivalry is sparked between the master and student, which propels them both to new heights. I still think they need to actually make these games in real life because they look incredibly fun to play, but who knows if that'll actually happen. I would love to see a third season of New Game since I was under the assumption that there was enough manga for a couple more seasons, but if it has to end here, I would be fine with that. Sure, I'd be upset, but I'd get over it. It's a fantastic series with lovable characters and a plot that anyone can get behind, and for that reason I'm awarding New Game with a 1080p. I still think it was a missed opportunity not to call it New Game Plus, though. I guess that's as good of a reason as any to make the third season, huh? I just have one thing to say. The fact that shows like Naruto and Bleach can have a long list of episodes and actual beautiful art can be limited to a dozen is a betrayal of humanity. Suriduri Children is such a fantastic and wonderfully told story that if they suddenly announced that there would be 800 more episodes, I wouldn't blink an eye. It's the story of how a group of seemingly unconnected people fall in love with each other, but it's the nature of the connections that makes this series worth the watch. Studio Gokumi, if by some miracle you're watching this, I humbly urge you to greenlight a second season. It definitely deserves it. I am giving Suriduri Children a 1080p for simply blowing my mind and leaving me with a desire to see what happens in these characters' lives. It takes a lot to make me this invested, so the only responsible thing would be to give me more, okay? Aho Girl is the type of series that I find enjoyable, but I don't really need any more of. It was funny, and the length wasn't really that offensive, but it wasn't something I really need to see again, if that makes sense. It's definitely the kind of series that reminds me of Himoto Umaru-chan simply because the main character is kind of insufferable, and in this case her foil is just as bad, if not worse. I watched the entirety of Aho Girl mainly due to the scenarios, not really the characters in the scenarios. That said, I'm giving Aho Girl a 360p for being mildly enjoyable, but still, it's one of the least entertaining series I kept up with this season. I initially started watching Netsuzo Trap out of a morbid sense of curiosity. I knew that the basic plot was supposed to be likened to a softcore hentai, but I figured Crunchyroll got the license for it, so it can't be too bad, can it? I don't know, really. It was enjoyable, in much the same way watching a dumpster fire is kind of enjoyable, if that makes sense. It's like, you know someone should put it out, but the flames look kind of interesting as they dissipate into the night sky. In that analogy, Netsuzo Trap is the fire. You know these characters are kind of awful, but you also kind of want to root for them, even if it goes against your snap judgments. Who knows? That actually might be the point they were trying to illustrate, but I doubt it. I'm giving Netsuzo Trap a 360p for being slightly entertaining but forgettable when all's said and done. So, after all of that, it's time to give my Anime of the Season award. It's difficult to do, but I know of just a series that deserves all of the acclaim, and this might not be a surprise, but I've gotta give it to Suradura Children. Despite the fact that it was a TV short, it made me feel things that no long-form series this season did, and for that, it fully deserves anything it gets. Thanks for watching Anime Ambush. Let me know what you thought about the titles I mentioned in the comments below. I'd like to thank Amy West for taking a look at this script before I recorded. If you like me and the content I produce, may I ask you to consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon if you can, to be notified each time I post a new video. If you love me, you can become my first patron and help financially support this crazy hobby of mine. Either way, I appreciate your existence, and I'll see you next time. Stay pixelated!